So very recently, we got some early spoilers from set 4, the new Jump to Lightspeed set. And basically everyone that was looking towards these new sets was kind of thinking we would be getting some space leaders. Leaders that are space units, not ground units. Instead, the company decided to go in a very different direction. And on that video that I posted about the very early spoilers, I was pretty excited. I thought that the mechanic was pretty interesting. I was hopeful, and I could potentially see a lot of cool things being done with it. But I can't tell you the vast majority, or you could say the vast loud minority of comments on that video was, oh, this seems like it's going to be completely irrelevant due to all the things that can counter this strategy. So we're going to dive in and talk about that a little bit today, because there is some concerns for sure, but there are also some things that you have to think about when you're talking about these leaders. And who knows? We haven't seen the full set. We haven't seen everything in association with it. We've seen just a little tiny drop of some new mechanics, and that will definitely shape the rest of the set and shape our opinion as we get the rest of the set. So this is just early discussion and sort of a response to a lot of those comments that were posted about early set 4. So with these early set 4 spoilers, the biggest thing that mainly this topic of discussion is focusing around is the new piloting mechanic. This is a new alternative cost to whatever car that has piloting on it, or in this case, the 3 leaders that were revealed, as you see behind me, Asajj, Boba, and Han, to where you can go ahead and basically have this modal option on any of these cards. You can either play, in this case, the leaders or a unit as a unit, or you can play the alternative version or pay the alternative cost to play it as an upgrade on any friendly vehicle unit as a pilot. So you cannot play multiple of these piloting cards on a single vehicle, because you can only have one pilot on a vehicle unless otherwise stated, but they are now upgrades. So you play it as an upgrade. So the first thing is this introduces a whole multitude of modal options in every given game. It's similar to kind of how Smuggle works, I'd say, right? Any given time in the game, you can go ahead and resource the cards that you draw in order to play it for its Smuggle cost. Realistically, most of the time, what that allows you to do is essentially give you the bonus ability of having more cards in your hand than you otherwise would have, because usually it's just the same card, but it costs more from the Smuggle pile. However, in some cases, take Hotshot Blaster, for example, or DJ, you get this massive bonus in order for you to basically be encouraged to go ahead and play it from your Smuggle pile. And in Hotshot Blaster's case, it's basically not even seen as an aggression card. It's exclusively a cutting card, because you're not really playing it in aggression since the Smuggle ability is so powerful. And so it's very similar in that way. You're going to get these, most of the time, big bonuses out of playing the upgrade side of things. In Boba Fett's case, you're getting this really nice mini overwhelming barrage alongside the +4/+4 that you're putting on any unit. But here is kind of the interesting part, is not only do you get that, but on the fail case, you get this somewhat below average unit if you want it. And this also applies to the cards outside of the leaders. Bosk was shown, Chewbacca was shown. They have this really interesting ability. You can play it as this upgrade. You can basically put that ability on whatever unit you want with additional stats. But if you don't have that option, if you don't have a unit on the battlefield, or if you don't have a vehicle rather on the battlefield to put that upgrade on, you can play the unit. And in Chewbacca's case, it's a 5/6. In Bosk's case, it's a 4-resource 4/4 with a little bit of a text on it. And some of these can be reasonable and honestly decently strong. But on average, it's going to be just a little bit weaker than getting that upgrade out. What you're really taking advantage of is the ability to have that scenario where if everything goes wrong, you'll be able to have that backup plan. And in the upside cases, take Boba Fett, for example, when you have something like a Fett's Fire Spray that immediately comes down ready, you suddenly get to play Boba Fett as an upgrade on your Fett's Fire Spray and immediately attack in for massive chunks of damage while getting the upgrade when played effect. But here's where the concerns come in, right? All of these are good things, right? Modal cards, perfect. You're getting potential really nice combos, and you're able to synergize with vehicle units, which we haven't really seen before because upgrades are normally non-vehicle cards. Okay, very cool. We have obviously new cards, new mechanics, and things like that. Very interesting. And a brand new way to play your leaders. All very, very cool, very interesting things. But as I said, this is where the concerns come in. And what are those concerns? Well, these leaders and all pilots are upgrades. They are upgrades. And this kind of leads to this, well, unfortunate circumstance where we have a lot of upgrade hate. Already in the meta, there is a lot of decks playing Disabling Fangfighter. A lot of decks are playing Confiscate in the sideboard, and in some cases, 1 or 2 copies in the main deck. Bamboozle is a very frequented card, oftentimes in the sideboard, but even in some cases, 1 to 2 of in the main deck in a lot of cunning strategies. Power Failure, this is a little bit different. Not something that you're normally seeing because you have so many better options generally. But in this case, you might be able to defeat multiple upgrades on something. And this is just from set 1. This is just from set 1. There are all sorts of different other ways to go ahead and interact with upgrades. We have things like Evidence of the Crime. We have the defeat a unit with 3 or less cost, and then you get to put experience tokens based on the amount of upgrades on that unit from set 2 that I forget the name of. We have things like, potentially going ahead and playing a Ketsu and defeating 2 or less cost upgrades. Not that these are all going to be very frequent options, but we have a ton of upgrade hate. And again, this isn't even including things that are going to come with set 4, as if you're printing a bunch of these new upgrade-based mechanics, there's a good chance that you'll probably print a couple of upgrade hate mechanics as well in the same set. And so as soon as we started talking about these leaders being upgrades, well, guess what? Disabling Fangfighter, Confiscate, Power Failure, Bamboozle. What do all of these cards have in common? Defeat an upgrade or interact with an upgrade in some way. And so when you look at a lot of the standard removal in the game, things like Vanquish, things like, Fell the Dragon, things like Takedown, they're all limited. They have some sort of restriction on them. One of the few rare exceptions to that is something like Arrival's Fall. But these are all very expensive things as well. Takedown, 5 or less HP, Fell the Dragon, non-leader unit, right? Also restricted on power or above. You have things like Vanquish, any non-leader unit. All of these upgrades that go ahead and, especially the leaders particularly, applying to units, turn them into leaders. But you could also just use these extremely cheap events, and in some cases units, that also defeat upgrades while progressing your board to deal with leaders immediately. And so there better be some really powerful when played abilities to the point where you are encouraged to go ahead and get value from that upgrade play in order for you to put yourself at risk of these defeat and upgrade type effects or interact with an upgrade in any sort of way. Now, there's still going to be situations where you put a Boba Fett on something like a Fett's Fire Spray and your opponent can Rivals Fall the Fett's Fire Spray and hit your leader, which has always been an issue, which even adds to some of the concern that a lot of people have had. And if you look at set 3's mechanic, the tokens, the Battle Droid tokens and the Clone Trooper tokens, we're not really seeing those come into play basically in any spot. The only deck that really has any sort of interaction with Battle Droid and Clone Trooper tokens tends to be the Chancellor Palpatine, which just has it by nature of playing the deck because you create Clone Trooper tokens with your leader. There isn't anything going around and trying to generate a bunch of tokens and coordinate them or generate a bunch of tokens and exploit things, because that's just not really that strong of a mechanic. And this is where we kind of double back to jump to Lightspeed and set 4 in that, well, if everything's an upgrade and upgrades are one of the easiest things to deal with, not only through specific upgrade hate cards, but also just dealing with one unit deals with 2 cards, well, we might be in for a little bit of a struggle. Now, there are some really interesting ones, like we mentioned earlier, things like Chewbacca that get around some of this, where it's not really nearly as bad to be able to remove 1, you get 2 cards, still susceptible to upgrade hate and things like that. But again, this is where the massive amounts of concern comes from. How many times have you just seen someone play a Darksaber and someone plays a disabling Fangfighter or a Confiscate or even just a Bamboozle, discarding a Cunning card, and you're suddenly completely out of the game? Now, upgrades aren't prevalent enough right now to see a lot of these in the main deck, but in some cases, like disabling Fangfighter, are just there to the point where if you play it in your main deck, it's not crazy. And if you do hit an upgrade, it becomes one of the best cards in your deck, defeating things like, already in this meta, Perilous Position, Darksaber, Traitoresses, and all manner of cards like that. Entrenched as well. And come set 4, if there's ever any sort of semblance of people trying to play some of these set 4 leaders with piloting, these cards are sure to make their main deck in some way or another, since Star Wars Unlimited does have that option of giving you the ability to resource anything that's not bad, or not good rather, at the time. So if you play 1 or 2 copies of Confiscate main deck, suddenly you have this one cost event, and if you enter in the matchup where your opponent's playing those upgrade cards or upgrade leaders or anything like that, you just have this really, really awesome haymaker. And then if your opponent doesn't go with the upgrade, they're playing a really mediocre leader with bad stats. So this is where a little bit of the concern comes in. But I'll say this, and this is really important to note. These are very, very valid concerns, because upgrades are a very, very weak part of the game overall, I would say. There's only a couple of upgrades that really see any play at all. These are things that like are bounties that go on your opponent's units and are meant to go ahead and go to the graveyard or discard pile, or things that kind of give you just supreme power towards your leaders. Well, in these scenarios, when we're talking about set 4 and we're judging based on what we have from set 1, set 2, and set 3, it's really important to note that we have not seen the entire set. And this is the same thing with what set 3 kind of came and gave us. Until we see not only more leaders, because these may not even be the leaders that we're like, oh my gosh, these are top tier leaders, but until we see the more leaders, until we see more of the piloting mechanic, until we see more of potentially the other mechanics that are going to be in the set, etc., it's really hard to determine whether or not this is going to be a successful mechanic. So while it is worrying to see things like Confiscate, things like Disabling Fangfighter potentially just being absolutely godsend cards, you also have to understand that in general, FFG has done a pretty decent job of balancing. Considering that Boba Fett was certainly an outlier, they have corrected that in a good way. Ever since then, it's been pretty reasonable in terms of what decks we're seeing, what cards we're seeing in the meta. And that means that they have to know that upgrade hate exists. And they have to know that putting a bunch of leaders that have this upgrade potential into the game, well, probably is going to be susceptible to that. So perhaps we're going to see a lot of cards that reinforce their strengths, or maybe these are just so powerful that it doesn't even matter if you do get hit by upgrade hate in some games, because in the games that you don't, it's just going to be so powerful that you will win the game. Who knows? Who knows? Right? But in terms of set 4, there's no comment on whether or not it's going to be extremely fun or anything like that, or anything that, oh, it's not going to be an exciting set. It's just a matter of bringing up some of these concerns and I suppose maybe alleviating some of that concern in terms of, well, we haven't seen any of this set, and we've seen FFG do a pretty solid job at balancing. So seeing these being played as upgrades, well, to me, at least the mechanic, from my opinion, just seems like an interesting mechanic, and we'll see how it plays out. I'm sure that there's going to be some good upgrade haze. I'm sure that it's going to be good when you're fighting these decks, but it's probably not going to be so oppressive to the point where it's unplayable, period. Although we'll wait and see, because as I mentioned, tokens in set 3 didn't really get there. So our leaders are going to be the same, because set 3's leaders are really, really strong. Some of the most dominant ones that we've seen. But this directly interfaces with leaders. So if we're not going to see the piloting mechanic be a strong mechanic, perhaps we're going to see a lot less of set 4. And I suppose that's something that we'll have to look out for, and whether or not it will come to play. But I choose to leave my faith in FFG so far, says they've done a pretty decent job. Pretty decent, okay? Don't think it's absolutely amazing. Don't think it's terrible. But definitely something that I think they have on their radar. And I'm very interested to see the result. So keep your concerns and hold on to them. But if I were you, I would remain hopeful. And I am pretty excited to have my leaders come down as something other than just a unit, because it just adds another dynamic to the game that we haven't seen yet. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Set 4, very early in existence, and we'll see a lot more of it, I'm sure. And I'll see you all then.